That's the parent coming out in you right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't get like in this, like I'm just in front of a screen all the
You
time.
look up and 2 days have gone by. You're like, oh shit.
Yeah, and I'm sure like originally when I first had the idea for the game, the first thing I wanted to do was a Kickstarter because I didn't want to give a piece of business or the game away. But before I even had a chance to do that, Apogee approached me and we ended up partnering with them. So we had originally had it scheduled for last October. At that time, we had about 750 pre-saves, so like the pre-launch page. And I talked with like the marketing team and just some other people, and they suggested we kind of wait out till we had more pre-saves. So we ended up waiting until the new year, and then we had around 1,700. And I feel like that was one of the defining factors that got us funded so quickly, because there is some sort of percentage, I don't know exactly what it is, but you can imagine it's like a wish list. When it goes live, people get notified. So a certain percentage of those people are going to back right away. Another percentage will back by the end of the campaign. So I think that really helps. So what I would suggest anyone who's doing a Kickstarter is to get that page up early, and start sending people that way. Almost like a wish list. Like it's hard to decide what you want to do. Like, do I want to get wish lists? Do I want to get pre-saves on there? But some of the people I talked to, what they did was they sent everyone to a pre-launch website showing everything about your game. And then within that pre-launch page, you have like a link to the Kickstarter, a link to the wish list, and an email list as well, so you can at least capture them all. Because wish lists, like you don't have any of that data. Like if someone wish lists like before your game goes live, like you can't say, okay, I just want to email everyone on my wish list. If you send them to your email list, or if you send them to your own like pre-save, at least you'll get them.
Yeah, you have a way to reach them. Yeah, which is a really smart idea, because you can keep them in the back of their mind. They keep thinking about your game.
That's one of the reasons game development is so tricky, is because it doesn't matter how good your game is if nobody knows about it. So
that's very true.
I'm trying to really strike a balance between posting and keeping people updated, but not take away from development. I mean, that's one of the reasons I haven't released a devlog yet, which I'm close, but I mean, I just haven't really been able to carve that time out, because every minute that I'm spending on doing that, I'm not working on the game. But it is important because, like you said, like there's thousands of games that come out every week. And,
yes, there are.
I mean, I don't want to be just one of those games. So I mean, I have to put my efforts into getting the word out there too.
You know, you did videography, you did animation prior to this. So talk to me about your background in both of those fields, and then kind of the tools that crossed over and the ones that didn't as you progressed.
I actually tried Unity a long time ago. It just never kind of like jived with me.
It's very different than Unreal. I mean, the way you approach your game is different. Just overall, Unity, the biggest strength, it has so much material behind it, right? Like there's so many tutorials on YouTube and like Reddit threads, and like you can basically, if you have a problem, 200 people out there have an answer for you somewhere that you can find. And I think Unreal is gaining in that regard, but that's where it kind of lacked. And that's why I think a lot of developers, like 80% of the developers I talk to, they all say they work in Unity. And then, you know, a lot of them will be like, but, you know, Unreal has more flexibility and, you know, less plugins and things like that. It's more integrated. So it's an interesting dynamic. You know? But yours is on Unreal, it's not on Unity?
Yeah, I tried Unity once, and then I kind of just put it down. And I think at that point, like you were saying, I was going to try Unreal, and this was like years and years ago. And there just wasn't as many tutorials out there. Yeah. So this time when I picked it up, like we've kind of hit that point where there's like lots of tutorials online, and I found this playlist on YouTube. It was like how to make an RPG, and it was like 50.
Perfect.
50, yeah, exactly. Perfect. So I'll just watch this and I'll have a game.
There you go. Yeah.
it was like, I think it was like 50 videos, and it took me a couple days to go through, and I just followed along. And then after that, like, it gave me like a decent grasp, and it got me kind of excited diving into like the free assets you get each month. And
when you watch a tutorial like that, all of a sudden you like, I want to add like 10 different things to the game because now you see all that stuff.
Well, that's another tricky part is like, you can do anything, but it's like you shouldn't do everything.
That's fair. That's a very good
point.
Anything, yeah.
But you do kind of you need to figure out.
Yeah, stay on the path, right?
Yeah, and like that is a hard thing to do, especially the game we're making, which is an open world, like kind of do anything game. So we have a lot of systems that have to work together, but there are still things that like I'm gonna have to say, no to.
But now that I completely interrupted you when you were talking about your videography and animation background. So circling back to that, talk about that for me for a second.
So I just had a small business, and it was essentially just me. I started out, there was a contest for Doritos chips, and they had whoever wanted to make a video could make a video. And I made like 4, and they were crappy. But I kind of got the bug then. I started making videos eventually, started charging people for it.
Did you win the contest though?
No. But the next year,
yeah.
I had a contest, and I won Best Special Effects.
There you go. Perfect.
And then we eventually ended up doing business animations and explainer videos. And that was kind of like my bread and butter for the last like 10 years. And I kind of thought that was where I would be. Like the goal at that point was like, at some point in time, I'd like to do like a feature length film. And then, so I thought animation was it. Like that was it. I found my thing. I love it. That was it. But then I opened up Unreal and
whole new world. I've noticed with a lot of video games lately that they crank the saturation like all the way up on these things. So they're like super bright, super colorful. Some videographers, and well, I would say more photographers, but they'll kind of do something similar. So when I looked at your game, I noticed, it's really bright, it's really colorful. I was gonna write this question down, but like, how much saturation is too much saturation, right? And that's not a diss on your game at all. I think your game looks great.
No, that's a good question. I guess for me personally, it's just like, if I think it looks good, and that's always subjective too. What we're trying to do is make something that's kind of eye-catchy, but not like overwhelming. And I mean, the other thing is, I always want to leave kind of these things to the preference of the player. So, I mean, we'll probably have a setting in there if you want to dial down that saturation.
For me particularly, when I saw your game, that was one of the things that popped out to me, was that color factor. And then when you said, when we initially started talking, you're like, I did videography, you mentioned photography. I was like, oh, okay, that does make sense, because that color palette, that does kind of, it transfers over. So it would make sense you would kind of take that into account while you're making the game.
Yeah, and originally when I first started making it, I found some assets on the Unreal Marketplace, and I fell in love with them. And that's a lot of the environment stuff that you'll see. And I just enjoy being in that world. But the other reason that I think it's a good choice is you don't have to worry about it being photo realistic. So like, let's say I decided to make a game that was like photorealistic. Whatever level we're at right now in terms of technology, I would kind of be set at that level, And if my game takes 3 years to come out, like, you can only imagine that realism is going to be pushed.
Yeah, it'll only be even better.
Further. So I think it's difficult when people are making a realistic game, because they kind of have to lock themselves into that style, and it might look a little bit outdated when the game actually comes out. So when you're in stylized, you don't have to worry about that so much, because it's a stylistic choice, right?
Yeah. I mean, just adding to that, I would say like a lot of indie developers who try realism in their games, I think ultimately you always risk the game being viewed by players as competition with AAA, or they compare the two, and ultimately you're always going to lose because it's a 5-person team or a 2-person team versus like, a team of 100, 200, 500. Like, you just can't scale to that level. So it's smarter just to play to your strengths and your market and just lean into that,
Exactly. And like, if you look back on like older games that are stylized versus ones that were trying to be realistic, Like the ones that are stylized tend to hold up a little bit better.
I always wonder, when I look back at like playing PS1 games, PS2 games, you think the graphics, they're mind blowing back in the day. And then you look back now and you're like, wow, that game was, it was not good graphics wise. It's just like, it's weird.
GoldenEye was my jam. And I remember that game being like, wow, the graphics are so good. Like, and look, you can see the people's faces. And now, like, if I play it, I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, it was so bad. But like, it's at that point, right?
At that point, it was the best stuff out there. So yeah. As like the person who this game came from, right? It's like, it's your baby. Is it hard to let it go a little bit? Like let go of the reins a little bit and let them explore and like you said, explore their creative side and their expertises and things like that?
At first, I thought it would be, but it's almost better. I think it is better because you get people and you get ideas from the people who are working on it that are better than your ideas at some point and add into your ideas.
It's a very healthy mindset. I think a lot of
it's not just mine anymore. Like,
it's everybody's.
It's everybody's. I still have that vision, and I think like that's kind of key. You need one person who is gonna like say like, okay, we're gonna do this. That doesn't mean like the people that are involved can't give creative ideas into. That's the same with when we do social media posts. Like a lot of times I post and I ask questions. And I mean, one is because like typically they do better on social media when you do that. But I also want to hear the answers because if you have one person saying something like that's one thing. But if 100 people are saying the same thing, then you're like, okay, well maybe that's the way it should be. Maybe
that's true.
They're onto something here.
One of the things that jumped out to me with this game is that you guys have co-ops, but it's split screen co-op. It's like couch co-op, split screen, which I always loved playing split screen growing up. And it's something that over the years, I think has gotten phased out. I don't think a lot of games will say they have split screen, but then it's in a very, very limited capacity. And every game almost has co-op now in some form or another, but it's not in split screen form. It's in, different consoles connecting together, different PCs connecting together via servers. So for you, what was the thought process to bring that in for this game? And then on the technical side of things, what is the challenge when you're trying to implement that into a game?
The first time I had the idea for the game was my kids and I were playing Zelda Breath of the Wild. And we were sitting next to each other playing, and it's only single player. So we wait for someone to die and then pass the controller over. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could play the split screen?
Yeah.
Like, let's just do that. That was the initial idea and reason we went with split screen. It did come with, and it still does come with some hurdles because you have to think about everything a little bit differently. Like if your quests are going to be shared, what happens when two people try to talk to the same NPC? How is loot going to drop? So there's a lot of things you have to think about, but it's infinitely less, I feel, than if it was a multiplayer. Well, it's a lot more work because you have to have two people interacting with the same systems. And not only that, you have to have two inventory screens up at the same time, have the map be able to work with both people. It's a lot of trial and error.
Talk to me about the game itself, right? The story, the gameplay.
The story for the game is, it's a brother and sister, I and Beckett, and you're essentially sent in through this portal to Elamithia, and you need to find 8 elemental stones and rebalance them to save Elamithia and Earth. In this world, Elamithia, there are 8 different biomes which coincide with the 8 different stones. So you have light, let's see if I can get them. Light, dark, water, ice, fire, nature, air, earth. So each biome is essentially its own kind of little world. They have their own villages, their own NPCs, their own enemies. Essentially, you can pick and choose where you want to go first. And the world, you're dropped into the nature biome, but you're free to like go to the ice biome if you want to start there and tackle it however you want.
When I was looking at your game, it's an RPG, it's open world. I think with open world games, they can really, really tax any game engine because they're just so massive and there's so much going on. And then in turn, they can tax the PCs that they're being played on or the console they're being played on. So a lot of developers, they use a lot of different, I guess, tactics, you could say, to kind of limit that amount of processing that needs to be done for a game like this. So, and I always thought the name was weird, but culling is one of them, right? I guess a lot of people thought about that. Nobody had ever really thought about it in the gaming side of things until that I think it was Zero Dawn. They had a video that came out that was showing it where it was like the person's view as they were turning the camera and it was showing like the world rendering in front of them and stuff, and like, you know, it's one of those interesting things you never think about as a player. And you know, there's other things that go into it as well, like rendering things that are close to you as opposed to far away, and certain, you know, degrees of sharpness, and like there are a lot of things that go into making your game more manageable for the system it's being played on. So for your guys' side of things, can you talk to me about how you approach that element of development? And
first, I think the stylized graphics help a little bit too, because most of the models are low poly. So that right away helps a little bit. We do use techniques like you were saying in Horizon Zero Dawn, where only certain things will be rendered. But then when you get into split screen, some of those kind of have to go out the window, because you might have
two people looking complete opposite directions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But another thing that we can do is, I guess you could call it cull. The enemies or any actors that are not in a certain radius. So if you have an enemy that's, you know, within 500 meters, like they are fully active. But if they hit like 1,000 meters, then their logic is gone, but their animations still work. And then if you hit another 500 meters, their logic is gone, their animations are gone, and essentially like they're just, you can just see them. Another thing that we're doing is we switched to Unreal Engine 5, and there's a lot of built-in tools that help as well. So there's a technology called Nanite, which essentially eliminates LODs, which are levels of detail that you have to put into each model to tell it when your screen space is a certain size, then you can shrink that model into less polys. So Nanite does this automatically, so you don't have to worry about LODs. And there's another system we're using called World Partition, and essentially you drop things into the world, and they will only spawn if you're in that certain radius. So that helps as well. I see. We just implemented a system that will switch trees from a foliage actor, which is like very low resource heavy, to an actor when you get within a certain radius, so they can be cut down. So now when you get to a certain distance, close enough to chop it, will turn into an actor, and when you walk away, it will turn back into a foliage actor. So there's things like that we're doing to help that. I want to make sure that the game is playable on like lower end PCs, and I think we can get there.
With a game like this, you mentioned that you do listen to people on social media who like talk about, you know, if there's a lot of people that are saying some things, you know, should be changed or whatever, implemented or tweaked in the game, they're like, you know, you lean into that a little bit. In today's era of gaming with like, you know, Twitch streaming and esports, you know, and YouTube, Let's Players, like all this, you know, content creation going on behind the scenes in tandem with gaming. Is that something you let impact your overall vision for the game? Or like, you know, when you're building this game, are you thinking like, this will be really good because, you know, a streamer can highlight this and that? Like, how much does that really play into your thought process with the game?
No, it doesn't really. But I shouldn't say it doesn't, because I think games that are streamable are games that are enjoyable. And if it's not going to be a game like, you know, Fortnite that's, you know, competitive, like it's not like that. But it's something that like I think people will enjoy being in that world. You know, I think it could potentially be a good streaming game. And I see my kids and how they play games, and like they'll be playing Roblox, and it's like they'll play one game. I know, don't get me started on Roblox. They'll be playing one game.
Yep.
And then they'll get bored of it and switch to another game. And it is a lot of the times that's because like they can't do what they want to do in one of these games. So I think that having these different aspects, like there's a little bit of it all, and that might seem daunting, and it kind of is, it's a lot, but it's also like that's the game that I want. Like that's the game that I want to play right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I have to build.
I mean, it's a great point. I think you leaning into, like you'd mentioned, Roblox with your kids and stuff. I think younger generations and younger players, like it's easy just to overlook that and look at the player base you have right now. But if you want longevity with your game, you look at those trends and you understand what's like pushing them and stuff. Like with Minecraft being more popular than it's ever been. I mean, which is wild how that game is still going to me. But I mean, don't get me started on Minecraft. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I think it's a smart take. And with this game specifically, you mentioned like things like no blood, things like, you know, no guns in your game. I think in the US I don't know why I said regulatory, I almost said that, regulations wise, it's, you know, you'd mentioned like the ratings and things like that, but it's not as much of a barrier like what you have in your game. But if you move into markets like the Chinese market, which is a massive market right now, decisions like that do matter when you're building your game out. There's more restrictions. They are starting to open up, but there is still that approval process and things of that nature. So when you're making this game and you do have a publisher, so they can kind of take some of that weight off of you. But is that something that factors in as well? Kind of that decision where you're like, it's going to this market, it's going to this market. I know you said, you know, you got to be passionate. It's got to be something that you want to play to make it engaging and fun. But is that something that does also kind of key in and have a factor? Yeah,
like I'm always thinking about like when I'm making specific quests or when I'm, you know, deciding to put an enemy in the game, like in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, like, is this a generic, like, will this work anywhere type of thing? And I think for the most part, that's what we're trying to aim for. Even with the story elements, we will be localizing it into different language. I think we have like 10 planned, but having that in the back of our mind while we're making it, so we don't like come into the point where like, oh, we built this big piece of the game where we can't really use in this market.
Right now, we're kind of leaning into the end of 2023. So talk to me about the roadmap moving into that. Talk to me about next year. Talk to me about kind of what your immediate plans are for the game, and then kind of your longer term plans after that.
Yeah, so we're working on an alpha for the Kickstarter backers that will be sent out to them by the end of this year. After that, our plan is early access next year, and we're probably going to enter early access with like half of the biomes complete, and then we'll probably stay in early access hopefully for just a year.
Here's one for you. Favorite RPG of all time. And then the flip side of the coin, least favorite RPG of all time.
Okay.
We're going to mix it up a little bit for you.
Favorite. I probably have to say, like, in terms of like scope and like the way play, like I'd probably have to go with Witcher 3 for best.
Yep.
And just because Zelda Breath of the Wild is like less an RPG in my mind, and that being said, like there are people who will say that Elements isn't an RPG, right? But if we did include Zelda, then it would be a tie between those two, and those are big influences in what Elements is going to be.
Yeah, I respect that.
Worst, I mean, I can't say that. I will say that anyone that makes a game and publishes it should be applauded, because it's not easy.
Politician and game developer. I like it. I like it.
I would never go onto a worst list.
I respect that.
Unless
I would say
it's not on the internet.
Yeah, that's fair. I would, you know what? I was going to say my least favorite, and it's just because I struggle to understand it, and that's more on my intelligence level than anything else, is Black Desert, because there's so much going on in that game.
Never
and
actually played it.
It's massive. It's just, there's so much. There's like every key has a thing it does, and there's quests going on and people everywhere. And I dropped in and tried it for a couple hours, and I tried it again a couple days later and a week later, and like I was committed because everybody was like, it's such a good game, there's so much going on, and I was like, I want to like it, and I was just too stupid to like it. So, you know, that's on me though.
I wouldn't say that. Maybe lacking of attention for that. Like, you know,
maybe, I don't know.
Every game is for everyone.
That's the spirit. Yeah. That's the parent coming out in you right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, and it's funny you ask about RPGs because like there's a lot of games that I haven't even, you know, played, but you'll still feel like there's some DNA from that game in elements, just because I try to consume as much gameplay content from good games and that games that do certain things really well, instead of actually like taking the time to play them. Like I'm trying to like, you know, just like get that Cole's notes of playing the game and kind of get the good pieces of it. So
yeah, I get
probably
that.
I probably watch more RPG gameplay than I actually play.